Hello, welcome back to your Big Creative Life podcast. Thanks for joining me. I recorded the first few minutes of this episode and then I had to stop and delete it because a FedEx truck had the audacity to pull up next to our house, not even at our house, but just the neighbor's house, and our dog went crazy, as he does when anyone comes near the house. So he was barking like crazy, and of course my daughter's down for a nap, so I'm like, okay, please don't wake her up. She's still asleep, but yeah, so I had to start over. Um, we're in the middle of, we're probably 4 nights into a little sleep regression. My daughter's 4 months old, and there's a notorious kind of 4 month sleep regression that happens with babies. This is the kind of thing that I didn't know about before I had a baby. She's a pretty good sleeper. Before this, she was getting up maybe once a night between like 4 and 5 to eat, which isn't bad, going to sleep between like 7 and 8:30. So she'd get a really good stretch of sleep in, which is great. But now she's waking up a few times to eat, and it takes me back to the newborn days when she would get up like, I don't know, 4 times a night to eat maybe. But we're lucky, knock on wood. This isn't wood, but knock on wood, because I know that for some babies or some parents, it's like an absolute nightmare. The 4 month sleep regression, they can be up every hour. So I'm thankful that she's not at that point, and also just hoping that it doesn't get any worse. Let's just hope it stays like this and that it's quick. So wish me luck. This is this episode, it's like mid-February as I'm recording this, so hopefully by the time the episode is out, we will be through it. She'll be back to sleeping mostly through the night. Fingers crossed. But I want to talk about 5 tips, 5 things that you can do to improve your writing beyond just write more. Because of course, writing more, practicing is going to develop that skill. It's going to develop the muscle. It's like going to the gym, getting your workouts in, getting your reps in. The more that you do it, the stronger that you're going to get. And the same exact thing is true with writing. But that isn't, I guess that's actionable in the sense that yes, you can go out and write, but I want to give you some other tips beyond just keep writing. But I guess that's like a pre-tip that I can give you. But besides that, let's dive into the tips. Okay, first one, I'm going to look at my list here. First one is to take a writing class. Anytime I mention writing classes, like on social media, for example, I always get people saying, well, I don't have any writing classes near me. Like I live in a small town, or I live in the country, or whatever. And that's fine. I know that not everyone lives in a big city where there is a literary center or a writing center or a school where you can take writing classes. Like I know that's not an option for everyone, but good news is it is 2024. There are so many options online for writing classes that you can take. I know Writer's Digest has some. I know, I'm blanking. What's the other one? I'll put a few options in the description of this episode of reputable online writing classes. I have a few for sale that you can purchase, that you can get access to. I have one that's like on editing your draft. I have one that's on creating strong characters, and I've actually got a full online course called Idea to Book that literally takes you through like having an idea for a novel. It walks you through developing characters and conflict and plot, how to actually sit down and write your book, how to edit your book, all the things, mindset, all the way to like finished, completed, edited book. So you can check those out as well. But taking a writing class is a fantastic way to sharpen your craft, but it's also really good to meet other writers. It's a great way to get motivation. I always feel so lit up and motivated and inspired when I take a writing class, even if it's one online that's like an hour. It's not a super intensive thing. It always lights a fire under me to get writing and to get back to my work in progress. So definitely recommend trying out a class. And they're not, there are like multi-week classes where, you meet every, Tuesday night for 8 weeks, but there are also just 1 or 2 hour kind of workshops. So there definitely are more affordable options out there if it's not in your budget to do like a lengthy multi-week kind of class. So definitely check that out. That's my first tip. Tip number 2 is, what is tip number 2? Oh, my screen is too small. Read like a writer. This gets talked about a lot, and I want to dive into exactly what this means in case you are new to writing and you've heard this, but you don't really know what this means. When you read like a writer, yes, you're reading for fun and for entertainment because reading is enjoyable, but you're also reading with a really critical eye. Imagine that you can approach this two ways. You can imagine that you are beta reading or editing for this author who has published this book. And of course, you're not going to actually like give them any of this feedback, but this is just an exercise for you. Make notes to yourself as you're reading. What do you suggest that they do differently? Like, what do you think can be improved when it comes to specific elements like dialogue, conflict, plot, characters, suspense, all of those things? What suggestions would you have for this author if this author came to you and said, hey, can you read this and give me some notes? I'm looking for feedback. The other way you can do it is really just pretend that you are like doing something for a school assignment where your homework assignment is to create an analysis of what the author's doing well, what's effective in the story, not just what you like, but what's effective, what is working, what are they doing well, and then also, again, like where do they need improvement, what suggestions do you have? And you can also just pay attention. If you don't want to approach it that way, you can just pay attention and see if you can pull apart, like analyze the text and see, how are they using dialogue? Are they using dialogue in a really interesting way that maybe furthers the plot in a really kind of unique way? Is the dialogue something where the characters are saying one thing, but then because you have access to the characters' interiority, their thoughts and feelings and all that, you know that what they're saying doesn't necessarily match what they're feeling? Like, how is the author using dialogue to further suspense and tension in the narrative? So look at each element and see if you can kind of tease apart how the author is using those things. And this is something that you can do across a variety of genres, not just in the genre that you are writing in or the genre that you want to write in. Read across all genres, read a wide variety of authors, and the more that you do this, the more that you start to hone your eye, the better your writing is going to be. And of course, it is really hard to do this to your own writing. I certainly can't be objective about my own writing, but I can at least start to identify things that are working in my own work, my own manuscript, and things that aren't working. So the more that you do that, it will definitely help. Okay, I have, let me see here. Oh, I have one more tip for you that's like something you can do. And then the last two tips are more things that you can do like in your actual writing itself. Beta read. Similar to reading like a writer and taking writing classes, you are going to really sharpen your craft and start to understand what makes a story function well, like all of these building blocks together, and what needs some work, what needs some improvement. If you're able to articulate that to someone else, that indicates that you have a good understanding of these different story components and how they're working. And again, when you are beta reading, when you are giving feedback to someone on their work in progress, this is not try to go beyond just like, I like this, I don't like this, because that's helpful in a way. It's giving the author some notes on how future readers down the road might respond and react to their work. So that is something that's helpful, but you want to go beyond that, again, to really kind of be critical. And I don't mean critical as in like point out all the things that they're doing wrong. I'm sure you've heard of this especially if you work in corporate and you've had evaluations for your job. There's like the feedback sandwich where you tell them something they're doing well, something that needs improvement, and then end with something that they're doing well. So you can kind of think about it that way too. The point of beta reading is not to just shred someone's work. I saw a comment once from someone who was like, I pride myself on making writers cry with my feedback or something. And I was like, that's not the approach that I would take. Like, I don't think you should be bragging about that. That's not the point. The point is not to tear someone down, even if their manuscript needs a ton of work. That's not the point of beta reading. So don't do that. Okay. My last two tips are, again, more kind of about the way that you're writing and like sentence structure and things like that. So the tip is to remove filler words to make your sentences and your actual writing stronger. And I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by this. So filler words are all of those things that, well, fill the sentences and kind of weigh it down. We do this a lot when we speak. If you notice in that previous sentence, I just said kind of, actually, just, like there are these words, very, really, these words that don't add anything to the text, don't clarify things, they just weigh the sentence down. And oftentimes there's a much more succinct way to say something as opposed to like adding all these unnecessary words in. And just because we do it all the time when we speak doesn't mean that we should automatically translate that to text when you're writing. So I'm going to give you an example of a sentence with some filler words in it and then tell you how I would change it, how I would edit it to remove those filler words. Now, just a caveat that some of this can be chalked up to writing style. Some writers have a naturally more very sharp, succinct prose, and that's just their writing style. Some people don't. They have a lot more flowery language. They like to have longer, really complex sentences, and that's not what we're talking about here. Both of those styles are worthy and wonderful, and the point of this exercise is not to tell you to cut down your sentences so that every sentence is brief and contains the least amount of words possible. It's more about removing unnecessary words and making sure that every word in your sentence serves a purpose. Okay, so here's my example sentence. Let me pull up my thing here. Okay. She set the very hot coffee on top of the really high table, which she realized was sort of wobbly. That's the sentence. She set the very hot coffee on top of the really high table, which she realized was sort of wobbly. If you're listening to this, you can probably pull out some of those filler words. I can identify a few right off the bat. Very, really, wobbly. So here's how I would revise that sentence. If this was my own writing, if on a first draft I wrote that sentence in my book, this is what I would do to revise it and make it shorter and cut out those unnecessary filler words. I would say, she set the hot coffee on the high table, which she realized was wobbly. Okay, the example isn't the best sentence in all of literature. It's not a great sentence, but I just wanted to give you a quick example, just to illustrate that saying she set the hot coffee on the high table, which she realized was wobbly, is a much better, more succinct way of saying what I said before, and it takes out those filler words, like sort of, instead of saying on top of, you just say on the table. It takes out very, really. So that's something that you can do in revision. Don't worry about this on your first draft. Again, that is absolutely a sentence that I would write on my first draft. And then later, I'd probably, when I was, getting to the end of my editing process, I would probably trim it down and take out those filler words. And one way that you can start to train yourself to notice these filler words is to read your work out loud. That's a good way to pick up on these words if you are having trouble doing it when you're looking at your sentences. Okay, so then my last tip, let me go back to my list here. Where did my list go? Oh, okay. Be sparing with your adverbs. Use adverbs sparingly, which is an adverb, I know. Okay, writer humor. There are writers out there, I think maybe Stephen King famously said something about adverbs. I don't know. I don't mind a well-placed adverb. I think it's totally fine to do that. But what you don't want to do is rely on adverbs to convey information to us. If after every single verb you have an adverb that conveys how something is being done, it can sort of weaken, I'm like noticing now that I'm using filler words when I'm talking, but it can weaken your writing. So instead of saying, she smiled widely at him and laughed loudly at his joke, you can take out those adverbs and, just let the sentence stand on its own. And if there is something that needs to be conveyed in terms of like how something is being done, think about using other ways to convey that information to us. If you think about the old kind of advice like show, don't tell, this is kind of like that. Because if you're including so many adverbs in your sentences, you're basically just telling us all about what the character is doing and how they're responding, how they're behaving, etc. But if you can show that through body language, through the reaction that the character is doing, that's a stronger way to do it. And that's going to make your writing stronger. So, instead of saying like she laughed nervously and moved her foot around timidly, or I don't know, something like that, you can say that, oh, the character like, her cheeks turned red and she, looked down at the ground and mumbled something. You can like use body language to show that the character is nervous, that the character is timid about something, as opposed to just relying on those adverbs. Again, I don't have a hard and fast rule that says no adverbs. Like, I think it's fine. I think, again, I use adverbs sometimes in my writing. They're totally fine. But it's just being cautious about how many you use. And if you're leaning on them as kind of a crutch, I guess. So I guess I should back up a step and just talk about what an adverb is really quickly, in case you are kind of rusty on English grammar. If it's been a while since you've taken a class, or if English is, not your native language or something, an adverb modifies a verb. So in the examples that I gave earlier, she laughed nervously. Nervously would be the adverb because it's modifying laughed, which is the verb, the action that the character is taking. She moved timidly. She chuckled loudly. A lot of adverbs end in ly, not all of them, but a lot do. So that's what an adverb does. So again, totally fine to have some adverbs in there, nothing wrong with that, but just be cautious about not overly relying on them, because that can be a sign of a newer writer. It can be a sign of a writer who doesn't really have the understanding of how to use other tools to convey what's going on to the reader. So just something to be mindful of. And again, I guess you could, same with the filler words, you could argue that this is a stylistic thing, but I don't really think that's true. I think it's more a matter about strengthening your writing, no matter what your style is. If you are someone who writes more succinct, short sentences, this can apply to you to use adverbs sparingly. Or if you have the long descriptive prose, the beautiful sentences that go on and on and on, like same thing, to use adverbs sparingly. So want to reiterate my advice from the beginning of the episode that was like not one of the 5 tips, which is just write. That is how you get better, is practice. You can do a lot of the things that I mentioned in this episode. You can beta read, you can take classes, you can do XYZ, and that's all great to learn and to get motivated, to meet other writers, etc. But ultimately, you have to write to get better. I always say, like, part of how you learn to write a book is by writing a book. You just do it, and then you learn along the way. So make sure that you're not kind of doing some of the things that I talked about in this episode as a way to put off the actual writing part, because you feel like you need to learn all the things before you dive in and start writing. You don't, I promise. Get in there, get your hands messy, start writing. It's going to be rough at first. It might feel kind of messy. That's totally fine. That's what a rough draft, if anything, is for. So, so good luck. Let me know if any of these tips are helpful for you as you start your writing journey or continue your writing journey. And I will see you next week.